Hi, I'm Sharon Renfro. Our hearts and minds at SharonRenfro.com believes that we must open our minds before we can open our hearts to one another. A fundamental idea to an alternative way to understand the psychology of relationships. This means that thinking is the key to successful, meaningfully connected relationships. Today's video applies the 3 steps of thinking to the relationship issue of making meaningful connections. Now, I'm going to talk about the 3 steps of thinking, and I'm going to give examples of each so that you can get the idea of what it is I'm talking about. So hopefully you can use it. Now, the first step of thinking is research. It means gathering objective and pertinent information to think about making meaningful connections. Number 1. Most of the time, we use emotions to assess our individual safety in our relationships. The connection between ourselves and our relationship partner exists only if we sense being safe as an individual in the relationship. Since we do not consider anyone but ourselves when we do an emotional assessment, we don't actually have any connection, and therefore experience nothing meaningful from the relationship. Just a sense of being safe in the context of that precise moment in time. That means that we automatically sense the relationship as threatening or safe, but not meaningful. Number 2, when we sense being threatened and respond using an emotional assessment and feelings, we behave with conflict, fight, distance, flight, pretend, camouflage, and cut off, play dead, directed at our relationship partner, the threat. None of these behaviors encourage or create any sense of meaningful connection. Number 3, we're meant to learn the adaptive strategies to have meaningful connections in our relationships at the time that the brain has matured to use these functions. The assumption that a healthy relationship rely on one's gut and feelings prevents us from learning to use the functions necessary to have meaningful connections. Number 4, we seek more from our adult intimate relationships than we experience in our relationship with our parents. With our parents, we needed protection and care, the expectation of being nurtured. With our relationship partners, we need meaningful connections to be able to sustain long-term commitments. Number 5, a focus on feelings does not promote being able to be meaningfully connected. Now, that's ironic, as we very much are encouraged to use our feelings to make all of our relationship decisions. The second step of thinking, reason, is using the pertinent and objective information that we gathered to reach a deep state of understanding of self and relationship process. Number 1, in order to understand, we must increase our self-awareness. We must collect more information from our sensory organs and express that increased self-awareness to our relationship partner. This increase in self-awareness gives the impression of being more alive, which is the first step in meaningful connections. When we risk giving another person pertinent information about ourselves, we begin to form a connection. Connections can't occur, without information. Number 2, we must listen with the motivation to understand. If we listen using our emotions to interpret what we hear, we will make quick judgments, determinations of whether or not our relationship is safe or threatening. This instinctual assessment shuts down any possibility of meaningful connection. To correct this, we must deal with the perception and interpretation of threat as an individual, thus stopping the placement of issues into our relationships when those issues don't even belong there. We must keep our relationship partner informed of this process, to keep our relationship partner, to help them to know what's going on so that we don't create anxiety. Number 3, we must verify that we have accurately received and sent information, that our communications are clear. Placing information into narrow categories is a good indicator that we are engaged in an emotional assessment which poses a high degree of error and will not help us to connect to our relationship partner. Number 4, we must understand that the goal of attaining meaningful connections will demand our attention, life energy, and self-awareness. The third step of thinking is reflection, and reflection is the awareness of each component part of the individuals involved in the relationship and the relationship process and how it interacts to form a dynamic and fluid system which can be influenced by thinking. It also includes having empathy for another person, and that is critical for any connection. Number 1, when we want to form meaningful connections, we need to be aware of the possibility that we may discover that we're actually not compatible with our relationship partner. That discovery can, in and of itself, form a meaningful connection. Such a discovery will result in the need to make decisions about the future of the relationship. Number 2, to increase self-awareness to the level of making meaningful connections, it will be necessary to define who we are. What are our values and our beliefs, and how do those values and beliefs determine principled behavior, in contrast to emotionally reactive behaviors of conflict, distance, pretend, and cutoff? It's critical that relationship partners also define a self if meaningful connections are to be made. However, this process may be undertaken at different times. Number 3, no one can be forced to make a meaningful connection, as that attempt represents an emotionally based behavior. Number 4, when a person has secured his or her own individual safety, separately and distinctly from any relationship, that person is then available to form a meaningfully connected relationship. We tend to think of the obstacles to this process as baggage, but the baggage probably comes from the early years of life. Number 5, the sense of respect, consideration, empathy, being able to choose to defer one's own needs for the interest of another person on a temporary basis, working as a team, having individual goals and goals for the partnership as partners, being deeply intimate, relating without engaging in an emotional assessment or acting on such an assessment, being committed to spending time and life energy to increase and improve self-awareness, and regularly assess goal attainment are all components necessary to forming and sustaining a meaningfully connected relationship. We must open our mind in order to open our hearts to one another. If these ideas have been beneficial to you, please like us to help others find us. And you may find more information and in-depth discussion of these ideas at our website, SharonRenfro.com, through our free podcast, Our Hearts and Minds, The Psychology of Relationships. Thank you so much for listening.